A young woman disappeared in 1986 after leaving home on roller skates, heading to a friend's house, one she never reached. Her parents didn't realize she was missing until the friend called, asking if she still planned to come over. By then, it was already too late. She had vanished without a trace. But 20 years later, her parents visited a small local market, and what her father saw in the window of an antique shop made his blood run cold. The hazy golden afternoon sun filtered through the dense canopy of old firs and maples lining the streets of Fern Creek, Oregon. It was 2 p.m., and the town with its charming, perfectly preserved historic downtown buzzed with the quiet energy of its weekend market. Wooden stalls overflowing with local crafts, artisanal cheeses, and the vibrant hues of freshly picked berries created a picturesque scene. However, Robert Whitmore found no charm in it. He walked a few steps behind his wife Helen, frowning, a familiar cloud of discontent weighing heavily on his shoulders. "I still don't understand why we had to come all the way out here, Helen," Robert muttered, his voice low enough not to reach the cheerful vendors, but sharp enough for his wife to catch every word. 3 days. 3 days in the middle of nowhere staring at jam. Helen paused by a stall displaying handmade pottery, her fingers lightly tracing the rim of a sky-blue bowl. She let out a soft breath, patience worn, but still holding on. "Robert, please, we talked about this. It's a vacation, our first one in, well, a very long time. Fern Creek is beautiful. Try to enjoy it, even just a little." It had taken years of gentle persuasion, silent pleas, and tear-filled late-night conversations for Helen to convince Robert to take this trip. Their home in Rockford, Illinois, had become a mausoleum of memories. Each room echoed with the absence of their daughter, Emily Grace Horry. Emily, their bright and lively 12-year-old girl, had vanished 20 years earlier while skating to a friend's house on a sunny afternoon, swallowed by the ordinary, leaving behind an abyss of unanswered questions and endless pain. Since that devastating day in 1986, Robert had shut himself away in a shell of grief. Joy became a forgotten language, pleasure a betrayal. He worked, ate, slept, but he didn't live. Each day was a monotonous cycle of searching, of wondering, of replaying those final moments over and over in his mind. Helen had also carried the crushing weight of their loss, but in the past year, a fragile shift had occurred within her. The raw agony had begun to soften, replaced by a quiet understanding that they couldn't remain suspended in that abyss of misery forever. Emily wouldn't have wanted that. Tentatively, she had begun to suggest they needed to find a way to go on to breathe again, even if their breaths would always carry the scent of sorrow. This trip to Oregon, to a place far from the ghosts of their past, was her desperate attempt to pull Robert back into the light, or at least out of the deepest shadows. As they wandered farther down Main Street, Robert's gaze usually fixed on the ground or some distant, invisible point locked onto a storefront across the road. It was an unremarkable place, with faded green paint and a sign above the door that read Timber Treasures in whimsical, slightly peeling gold letters. The display windows were crammed with a chaotic assortment of items. Tarnished silverware, stacks of old books, a chipped porcelain doll, and what looked like a collection of oddly shaped tools. It was unmistakably a pawn antique junk shop, the kind that seemed to hoard forgotten stories. Helen's eyes lit up. "Oh, look, Robert, that place looks interesting. You know how much I love vintage things. It reminds me of when we were younger." She pointed toward it with a hopeful smile. "Let's just go in for a minute." Robert's expression remained blank. "You go ahead. I'll wait out here. All that dust and clutter's not for me." He reached into his pocket for his pack of cigarettes and lighter, the familiar ritual, a small and somber comfort. Helen's smile faltered slightly, but she nodded. "All right, I won't be long." She crossed the street with steps lighter than his and disappeared through the door of Timber Treasures, the bell above it chiming softly. Robert leaned against a lamppost, the cigarette halfway to his lips. He was just about to flick the lighter when his gaze, almost absent-mindedly, shifted toward the dusty shop window. His hand froze. His breath caught in his throat. There, nestled between a collection of faded jars and a headless mannequin torso on a rough wooden shelf, was a pair of pink and blue roller skates. Battered, worn, the plastic showing its age and clearly child-sized. He blinked, thinking his mind was playing tricks on him, conjuring specters from the depths of his grief. But the image remained. Slowly, he lowered his hand, forgetting the unlit cigarette. He stepped away from the lamppost and took one hesitant step, then another, until his face was nearly pressed against the dirty glass. They were undeniably, heartbreakingly familiar. The exact shade of bubblegum pink on the boot, the vibrant turquoise of the frame and wheels, the thick purple straps. A wave of dizziness swept over him. Emily. Emily had a pair exactly like them. No, not like them. Those were the ones he had bought for her 12th birthday. He remembered how her eyes had lit up, the pure, genuine joy when she first put them on, wobbling at first, then gliding, a blur of color and laughter. The cigarette and lighter jingled as they fell back into his pocket. He didn't think he reacted. He flung the shop door open, the bell above it clanging violently, and strode inside, scanning the dimly lit interior until his gaze landed on a balding man with a weary expression behind a cluttered counter. Helen, who had been examining a display of old radios near the back, turned, startled by his sudden entrance. "Robert, what is it? Are you okay?" She hurried toward him, concern etched across her face. Robert ignored her for the moment, his attention locked on the shopkeeper. "The skates," he said urgently, his voice hoarse. "In the window, I need to see them. Now." The shopkeeper frowned at his abrupt manner, but moved toward the display. "What's going on?" Helen asked, confused. "Look," Robert said, his voice barely above a whisper. The shopkeeper returned with the skates and placed them on the counter. Helen's hand flew to her mouth when she saw them. Robert exhaled, his voice trembling. "They look just like Emily's," Robert finished, extending his trembling hands to pick up one of the skates. He turned it over in his hands, examining every detail. "Size 4. That's the size I bought her." Helen shook her head, placing a restraining hand on his arm. "Robert, please, don't do this to yourself. There must be thousands of pairs like these. It's just a coincidence." But Robert wasn't listening. He flipped the skate over and checked the bottom. There, etched into the plastic toe guard, were the initials EGW. "Emily Grace Whitmore," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I carved these myself, Helen. These are hers. These are Emily's skates." Helen's skepticism vanished when she saw the initials. She reached out and traced the letters with the tip of her finger, trembling. "How is this possible? How did they end up here, thousands of miles from home?" The shopkeeper, who had been listening to their exchange with growing interest, cleared his throat. "Is there a problem?" Robert looked up, his eyes intense. "These skates belong to our daughter. She disappeared 20 years ago while wearing them. Where did you get them?" The shopkeeper's demeanor changed instantly. He reached for the skates. "I'm sorry about your daughter, but these aren't yours anymore. If you want them, you'll have to pay the marked price." Robert stared at him in disbelief. "You don't understand. This is evidence. Our daughter was abducted while wearing these skates." "I don't care what story you're telling," the shopkeeper replied coolly. "All I know is that these are inventory in my store, and they're priced at $45. $45? Robert exclaimed. "That's robbery. I paid less for them brand new 20 years ago." "Inflation," the shopkeeper shrugged. "Plus, vintage items carry a premium these days." Helen placed a calming hand on Robert's arm. "Maybe we should just pay for them, Robert. It doesn't matter what they cost." "No," Robert said firmly. "They're ours. They were stolen from us. Just like they stole our daughter," Robert said. "I'm not going to pay for something that belongs to us." The shopkeeper's face hardened. "If you're not going to buy them, I'll have to ask you to leave." When Robert refused to move, the shopkeeper came around the counter and tried to physically guide them toward the door. Robert resisted, clutching the skates tightly to his chest. The commotion drew the attention of passers-by outside, and a uniformed police officer who had been patrolling the market approached the store. He stepped inside, assessing the scene with a trained eye. "What's going on here?" he asked. The shopkeeper pointed accusingly at Robert. "This man is trying to steal merchandise from my store." "I'm not stealing anything," Robert protested. "These skates belong to my daughter." She was wearing them when she disappeared 20 years ago in our hometown in Illinois. The officer looked skeptical. Sir, if you have a claim on that property, there are proper legal channels to go through. You can't just take them. Look, Robert said desperately, turning the skates over. See these initials? EGW Emily Grace Whitmore, my daughter. I carved them myself. And here's the product serial number that would match the receipt I've kept all these years. The officer's expression shifted slightly as he examined the initials. He stepped back and spoke into his radio, requesting information on a missing persons case from Illinois 20 years prior. After a brief conversation, the officer's demeanor changed completely. He turned to Robert, a new respect in his eyes. Mr. Whitmore, I apologize. The station confirms there is indeed an open case matching your description. He turned to the shopkeeper. I need to speak with the owner of this establishment. I'm just an employee, the shopkeeper said defensively. The owner isn't here today. I'll need his contact information, the officer said firmly. The shopkeeper hesitated, then reached under the counter and pulled out a business card. That's the owner's info, Victor Manson. But he's not going to be happy about this. The officer pocketed the card. I'm confiscating these skates as potential evidence in an ongoing investigation, the officer said. He turned to Robert and Helen. Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, I'd like you to come with me to the station to provide a statement. As they exited the store, Robert felt a flicker of hope for the first time in 20 years. Maybe, just maybe, this was the chance they had been waiting for. Robert and Helen followed the police officer to his patrol car, parked at the edge of the market. Officer Brennan, as his nameplate identified him, suggested they drive their own car and follow him to the station. It's not far, he assured them. Just about 10 minutes down Main Street. The Fern Creek Police Station was a modest brick building with a small American flag waving over the entrance. Inside, the atmosphere was calm and professional, a stark contrast to the emotional storm building inside Robert. Officer Brennan led them into a small interview room with a table and 4 chairs. The skates were placed in the center of the table, sealed inside a clear evidence bag. I've contacted the detective on duty, Officer Brennan explained. He'll want to take your full statement. In the meantime, I need to verify a few details. He pulled out a notepad and pen. Can you describe your daughter as she was when she disappeared? Robert cleared his throat. Emily was 12 years old. She had shoulder-length reddish-brown hair and green eyes. She was tall for her age, about 5'3". She had a small scar on her right forearm from when she fell off our backyard fence at age 7. Officer Brennan nodded, jotting notes. And when exactly did she go missing? June 15th, 1986, Helen answered, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. It was a Sunday afternoon, around 3 p.m. She was heading to her friend Samantha's house about half a mile away. She wanted to show off her new skates. She never made it to Samantha's house, Robert continued. We didn't realize something was wrong until Samantha's mother called around 5 p.m., asking if Emily was still coming over. The door opened, and a plainclothes man walked in. He looked to be in his 40s, with graying hair and a serious expression. I'm Detective Marshall. He introduced himself, shaking Robert and Helen's hands. I understand you've uncovered a potential lead in your daughter's disappearance. Robert nodded toward the evidence bag. Those are Emily's skates. I'm sure of it. Detective Marshall sat down across from them. I've contacted the authorities in Illinois. They're sending over the case files, but it may take a few hours. In the meantime, I'd like to hear the full story from you. Over the next hour, Robert and Helen took turns recounting the events surrounding Emily's disappearance. They described the massive search efforts, the volunteer teams that combed through woods and neighborhoods, the flyers they distributed across the state and beyond. We never stopped looking, Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. I took a leave of absence from work that first year. We set up a tip line. We hired private investigators when the police investigation stalled. But there was never anything solid. Just nothing. Detective Marshall nodded sympathetically. And now, after all this time, you find her skates in a small town in Oregon. That's quite extraordinary. Is there any way to trace how they ended up here? Helen asked. The shop clerk wasn't very helpful. We're working on that, Detective Marshall assured them. I've sent another officer to look into the background of the store owner, Victor Manson. We'll also be visiting the shop tomorrow to review its inventory records. He turned his attention to the skates, carefully removing them from the evidence bag with gloved hands. These will be photographed and logged as evidence. We'll also check for fingerprints or trace evidence, although after 20 years, it's unlikely to yield much. As he spoke, another officer entered the room carrying a folder. Detective Marshall reviewed the contents, his expression turning thoughtful. Mr. Manson bought timber treasures 18 years ago, he informed them. Before that, it seems he moved around quite a bit. No criminal record, but not much of a paper trail either. He showed them a photo from Victor Manson's DMV record, a man in his 50s with thinning hair and a stern expression. Do you recognize this man? He asked. Robert and Helen shook their heads. He's expected back in town in 2 days, according to his employee, Detective Marshall continued. We'll bring him in for questioning. By the time all the preliminary work was done, the sun was setting outside the station windows. Detective Marshall escorted Robert and Helen to the station's entrance. A full team of young cheerleaders from Arizona vanished in 1995 after a performance, mysteriously disappearing and leaving behind only unanswered questions and devastated parents. But 20 years later, a hiker finds something shocking in the desert, a discovery that would change everything and reveal the disturbing truth. The Arizona sun streamed through the kitchen windows, casting long rectangles of light across the breakfast table where Marissa Green sat with her husband David. It was a typical morning in Chandler, Arizona, or at least as typical as mornings had been over the last 20 years, since their twin daughters had vanished without a trace. Marissa absent-mindedly stirred her coffee, her thoughts drifting as they often did to April and Amber. The girls would be 34 years old now. What would they look like? Would they have children of their own? These questions haunted her daily, though she had learned to live with the uncertainty. The sudden vibration of her phone against the wooden table startled her. She looked down, expecting to see a coworker or perhaps someone from her grief support group. Instead, she froze. The name Detective Holbrook lit up her screen. It's Detective Holbrook, David said in a barely audible voice. His head snapped up from his newspaper, eyes wide with disbelief. Detective Liam Holbrook had been the lead investigator on their daughter's case, a case that had gone cold years ago despite media coverage and extensive searches. Answer it, David urged, setting down his coffee cup with a trembling hand. Marissa slid her finger to accept the call, her heart pounding against her ribs. Hello, Mrs. Green. Detective Holbrook's deep voice echoed through the speaker. I hope I'm not interrupting your morning. Not at all, Marissa replied, putting the call on speaker so David could hear. Is everything okay? We have a significant update regarding your daughter's case, the detective said with a measured tone, though an undercurrent of urgency made Marissa's stomach tighten. What kind of update? She asked, her voice cracking slightly. After 20 years of silence, any development seemed impossible. Have you found? I can't explain everything over the phone, Detective Holbrook interrupted gently. Could you and your husband come down to the station? The sooner, the better. David leaned forward. We'll be there right away, he assured the detective. Thank you. I'll be waiting. The call ended, leaving the kitchen in silence. For a moment, neither of them moved, as if afraid any sudden action might shatter this fragile moment of possibility. We'll keep following this lead, he promised. I've assigned an officer to revisit the shop tomorrow to see if there might be any other items connected to your daughter. In the meantime, try to get some rest. As they stepped into the fading light, Robert felt a strange mix of hope and dread. The skates were real, tangible proof that somehow, somewhere, there might be answers about what had happened to Emily. But what those answers could reveal after all these years terrified him more than he liked to admit. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink as Robert and Helen made their way back toward the market. Despite the late hour, Robert insisted on returning to Timber Treasures. The police will handle it, Robert, Helen said, gently tugging on his arm. We should go back to our Airbnb and rest. It's been an exhausting day. I need to see it again, Robert insisted, quickening his pace. There might be something else. There's something we missed. Helen sighed, but followed him anyway, recognizing the resolve in his jaw. Most of the market stalls had been dismantled for the day, with vendors packing up their unsold goods. Only a few restaurants remained open, their warm lights glowing invitingly in the dusk. As they approached Timber Treasures, they saw the shopkeeper from earlier locking the front door. He spotted them and visibly tensed, his movements becoming hurried. "Look, someone else is coming out," Helen whispered, pointing to a side door that Robert hadn't noticed before. A man emerged from the alley beside the store. He wore a leather jacket and a cowboy hat pulled low over his face, but even from a distance, there was something familiar about his profile. Robert squinted, trying to place him. "He looks like the man in the photo," Robert murmured. "The one the detective showed us, Victor Manson." Helen frowned. But the detective said he wouldn't be back for 2 days. Why would the shopkeeper lie to the police? They watched as the man crossed the street toward a black sedan parked in front of a toy store. Another man stood next to the car, and beside him was a little girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, with blonde pigtails. The man in the cowboy hat approached the girl first, crouching down to her level. He reached out to hug her, but the girl visibly pulled back, turning her face away. When he ruffled her hair, she flinched. "Something's not right," Robert said, his protective instincts flaring. "That little girl is afraid of him." "We can't be sure of that, Robert," Helen said cautiously. "It might be nothing. Kids often get moody, especially after being told they can't have a toy they wanted." Robert nodded, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were witnessing something sinister. The interaction seemed off-loaded with an undercurrent of tension that sent a chill down his spine. They watched as the 3 figures got into the black car and drove off. Robert turned his attention back to the shopkeeper, who was now walking briskly down the street toward a bus stop. Without thinking, Robert ran after him. "Excuse me," he called. The shopkeeper turned, his expression souring when he recognized Robert. "Now what?" "The police already took what they wanted." "That man who just left through the side door," Robert said, catching his breath. "That was Victor Manson, the owner." The shopkeeper's eyes narrowed. "I don't have to answer your questions. If the police want information, they can ask me directly." "Just tell me if it was him," Robert insisted. The shopkeeper rolled his eyes. "God, you just can't calm down, can you?" "No, that wasn't the boss. It was his brother." "Happy now? Go away and leave me alone." With that, he boarded a bus that had just arrived at the stop, effectively ending the conversation. Helen caught up to Robert as the bus pulled away. "What did he say?" "He claims it was Manson's brother, not Manson himself," Robert replied, frowning. "But why didn't he tell the police that his brother is here if the owner is out of town?" Helen shivered, pulling her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. "I don't know, Robert, but it's getting dark and we're both exhausted. Let's go back to the Airbnb and call Detective Marshall in the morning." Robert hesitated, torn between pursuing this new lead and recognizing the wisdom in Helen's words. Finally, he nodded, casting one last glance at Timber Treasures before letting Helen lead him away. Tomorrow, he promised himself. Tomorrow we'll get answers. Their Airbnb was a cozy apartment on the 2nd floor of a converted Victorian house located in a quiet residential neighborhood just a few blocks from the market. The pale blue exterior and white gingerbread trim gave it a quaint, nostalgic charm that had initially attracted Helen. When she booked it, as they approached the building, Helen touched Robert's arm. "I'm going to run to that Chinese restaurant we passed on the corner. Could use some comfort. Food after today." Robert nodded, pulling the apartment key from his pocket. "I'll wait here. Could use a cigarette to clear my head." Once Helen disappeared around the corner, Robert sat down on the front steps of the building and lit a cigarette. He took a deep drag, letting the smoke fill his lungs before exhaling into the darkening sky. The familiar ritual calmed him somewhat, allowing his mind to process the extraordinary events of the day. Finding Emily's skates after all these years couldn't be a coincidence. They were a link, a tangible connection to their daughter, who had been missing for 2 decades. But what did it mean? How had they ended up in a junk shop in Oregon, thousands of miles from where she had disappeared? His hand trembled slightly as he took another drag. If the skates had made it here, it was possible that Emily had too. And if so, she was still alive. The thought both exhilarated and terrified him. For 20 years he had lived in a suspended state of mourning, unable to fully grieve a daughter who might still be somewhere out there. The skates had rekindled a hope he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Robert pulled out his phone and began searching for information about Victor Manson and Timber Treasures. There wasn't much a sparse business website showing the store's exterior and hours. Some online reviews praising its eclectic selection. Nothing about Manson personally. As he scrolled, a movement across the street caught his attention. A small figure was partially hidden behind a lamppost watching the buildings. Robert squinted through the growing darkness. It was a girl, maybe 10 or 11 years old. Robert stubbed out his cigarette and stood up. "Hello," he called, keeping his voice gentle. "Are you okay?" The girl stayed still for a moment, then took a tentative step forward. She was thin, with dirty blonde hair tied in a messy ponytail, wearing clothes that looked too big for her small frame. "Are you looking for someone, sweetheart?" Robert asked, approaching carefully. The girl looked up at him with big, serious eyes. "Please, sir," she said in a small voice. "Can you save my sister? A bad man took her." Robert glanced around, suddenly alert. Was this some kind of trap? A distraction while someone entered the apartment? But the street was quiet. No suspicious vehicles or lurking figures. "What's your name?" Crouching down to her level. "Carla," the girl answered. "Please, I need help. No one believes me." "Who sent you here, Carla?" "No one sent me," she insisted. "I'm alone. I ran away from the orphanage to find my sister. I saw her today, but I was too scared to help her by myself." Robert's thoughts raced. An orphan girl, a missing sister. It echoed his own situation too. Closely to be a coincidence. "Your sister, where did you see her?" "At the market," Carla said, "with the man in the hat. She's afraid of him, but she has to pretend she's not." Robert held his breath. The little girl with the pigtails, the one who had shuddered when the man touched her hair. "That man with the hat," Robert said cautiously. "He's tall with thinning hair, wearing a leather jacket." Carla nodded vigorously. "It's him. He took Yasmin from the orphanage. He said he adopted her, but it's not true. He's a bad man." Robert's mind raced. He thought of Emily, the years stolen from him, the answers that had eluded him for 2 decades. And now this girl stood before him, facing the same potential tragedy. "Do you know where they took your sister?" asked. Carla nodded. "I followed him before. I know where they go, but I can't get her out alone." Robert's conscience battled with his caution. This could be dangerous, possibly illegal. The right thing would be to call the police. Let them handle it, but he knew the frustration of official channels, the procedures and protocols that moved too slowly while a child remained in danger. "Let me help you," he found himself saying. "Let me get my car." He sent a quick message to Helen, taking the car for a bit. Something came up. "Use your key. Start dinner without me. I'll be back soon." As they climbed into his rental car, Robert knew he might be making a terrible mistake, but he also knew he couldn't live with himself if he walked away from this girl's plea for help. Not when he had spent 20 years wishing someone had been there to help his own daughter. The rental car hummed quietly as Robert followed Carla's directions, taking turn after turn through the residential neighborhoods of Fern Creek. The houses grew farther apart, the streetlights becoming more sparse. "There it is," Carla finally said, pointing to a small caravan park hidden behind a grove of trees. Robert parked at the entrance and turned off the engine. In the dim light, he could make out several motorhomes and caravans arranged in a loose semicircle. At the farthest end was a solitary camper van, its windows glowing with yellow light. "That's it," Carla whispered. Robert hesitated, his hand on the door handle. "Carla, are you absolutely sure your sister is there? This is very serious." The girl nodded, her eyes solemn. "Please, we have to help Yasmin." Against his better judgment, Robert got out of the car. "Stay close to me," he instructed Carla. "And if anything feels wrong, we leave immediately, understand?" They approached the camper van cautiously. There was no sound from inside, no indication of how many people might be there. Robert's heart pounded in his chest as he raised his hand and knocked firmly on the door. Seconds stretched to a full minute with no response. He knocked again, harder this time. Finally, the door flung open. A man stood in the doorway, backlit by the interior lights of the camper. Robert recognized him as the other man from outside the toy store, not the one with the cowboy hat, but the one who had been waiting by the car. The man's eyes widened when he saw Carla. Then his gaze narrowed as it shifted to Robert. "Who the hell are you, and what do you want?" "My name is Robert," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "This girl came to me asking for help. She says her sister was brought here." The man's face darkened. "My name is Mike, and you've got it all wrong. No one is being held here against their will," he said, glaring fiercely at Carla. "She's a troublemaker. She's been causing problems ever since her sister was adopted." "Adopted?" Robert repeated. Mike nodded. "That's right. Yasmin was legally adopted from St. Catherine's Orphanage by my boss. I'm just his assistant," he said, gesturing with his thumb toward Carla. "She couldn't accept it and has been making up wild stories ever since." "Lies, lies," Carla shouted, her little face twisted with anger. "You took her, and that man took my sister." "What man?" Robert asked, though he already suspected the answer. "The girl was adopted by my boss," Mike explained with exaggerated patience. "His brother came with me to pick her up because my boss is out of town on business. Everything was done legally." Robert found himself torn between believing the man's plausible explanation and the raw conviction in Carla's voice. "Look," he said, trying a reasonable tone. "I'm sure we can work this out. Maybe I could talk to your boss, or even see Yasmin for a moment. If the sisters could speak briefly, say a proper goodbye, maybe that would help everyone move forward." Mike's expression hardened. "That's not possible. Yasmin isn't here. She's already been taken to her new home in another car." As he spoke, Robert heard a faint noise from inside the camper, a soft sound of silence, followed by what might have been the whisper of a child. Mike quickly glanced over his shoulder, then back at Robert. "He's just my son," he said disdainfully. "Look, I suggest you take that girl back to St. Catherine's before you get into trouble for endangering a minor. Whoever she is, she has no right to take a minor out of the city without permission." "I was only trying to help," Robert began. "Help?" Mike scoffed. "Kidnapping an orphan based on her wild stories. Return her to the orphanage, or next time I'll call the police." With that, he slammed the door in Robert's face. Robert stood there for a moment, processing what had just happened. The man's explanation made sense, but something felt off about the whole situation. "He's lying," Carla insisted as they walked back to the car. "Yasmin is in there, I know it." "You heard him," Robert said softly. "Your sister has been adopted. It might be hard to accept, but she's not there." Carla kicked the ground. "That's not true. Please, you have to believe me." Robert sighed, unsure what to do next. The right thing would be to take Carla back to the orphanage as Mike had suggested, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. "Let's get back to the car," he said finally. "We'll figure this out." Back in the car, Robert turned to Carla, who was sitting slumped in the passenger seat, her little face set in a stubborn frown. Carla began softly. "I understand you're worried about your sister, but I have to take you back to the orphanage. I could get in serious trouble for taking you like this. Please don't take me back," she begged, tears filling her eyes. "No, not without Yasmin. I promised I would protect her." Robert's heart ached for the girl. He remembered making a similar promise to Emily years ago that he would always keep her safe. A promise he had failed to keep. "How about this?" Robert suggested. "We'll have something to eat, something nice, and then I'll take you back. I won't get you in trouble, I promise." Carla wiped her eyes on her sleeve, but remained silent, a picture of despair. Robert was about to start the car when he noticed movement from the camper. The headlights came on, casting a harsh white light on the trees. "They're leaving," he murmured, watching as the camper began to pull away. As it passed his parked car, Robert caught a glimpse of someone through the side window, a woman with reddish-brown hair, closing the camper curtains one by one. For a fraction of a second, their eyes met through the glass. Emily. The name escaped his lips like a whisper. It couldn't be. And yet, there was something in her face, the shape, the arrangement of her eyes, that was eerily familiar. It was exactly how he had always imagined Emily would look as an adult. The same features that had smiled from countless age progression photos over the years. Without thinking, Robert started the car and pulled onto the road, keeping a careful distance behind the camper. "What are you doing?" Carla asked, sitting up straighter. I saw someone in that van, Robert explained, his voice tense with emotion. A woman who could be my daughter. Your daughter? Robert nodded, keeping his eyes fixed on the taillights ahead. My daughter Emily disappeared 20 years ago when she was 12. Like your sister, she vanished while I thought she was safe. As they drove, Robert's phone began to ring. Helen's name flashed on the screen. He hit the speaker button. Robert, where are you? Helen's voice filled the car, tense with worry. I've been waiting in the apartment. Helen, you're not going to believe this, Robert said, his words spilling out. I think I saw Emily. I'm following a camper right now. There's a woman inside who looks exactly like her. What, Robert? Where exactly are you? The alarm in Helen's voice was clear. Are you sure it's her? I'm not sure about anything, Robert admitted. But Helen, you know we always said Emily had that kind of face that didn't change much, even as she grew up. This woman is like seeing an older version of her, exactly how I imagined she'd look now. Robert, please be careful, Helen pleaded. You don't know who these people are, or what they're capable of. I have to follow this lead, Helen. I have to know. At least tell me where you are. Helen's voice cut out as Robert lost reception, the road taking them deeper into rural territory outside Furnick. For nearly an hour, they followed the camper along winding back roads, keeping enough distance to avoid being spotted. Carla remained quiet, occasionally pointing out detours to help him keep track of their target. Finally, the van turned onto a gravel driveway leading to a large house set back from the road. It wasn't a mansion by any means, but it was substantial, a two-story country-style house with a wraparound porch and a detached garage. Robert turned off his headlights and stopped by the roadside about 100 meters from the property entrance. From this partially hidden vantage point behind trees, he could watch the house without being immediately visible. What are we doing now? Carla whispered. Why are we here? Robert turned to her, suddenly aware of how strange and potentially frightening this situation must be for her. I'm sorry, Carla. I should have taken you back to the orphanage, but you're not the only one who's lost someone you love. My daughter Emily disappeared 20 years ago, and I think I just saw her in that camper, which is why I followed it here. Carla's eyes widened with understanding. Do you think the bad men took your daughter too? I don't know, Robert admitted, but I intend to find out. He focused his attention back on the house, watching as the camper parked near the front steps. Mike emerged first, followed by a woman holding a little girl's hand, unmistakably the girl from the toy store. Yasmin, that's her, whispered excitedly. She's my sister. As the woman moved into the light cast by the porch lamp, Robert's breath caught in his throat. She was tall and slender, with the same reddish-brown hair that Emily had inherited from Helen. Even from this distance, he could see she moved with a grace that painfully reminded him of his daughter. Then, to his surprise, another figure stepped out of the van, the man with the cowboy hat. But he wasn't wearing his hat now. Under the bright porch light, Robert could clearly see his face. The same man he had seen in the Denby photo at the police station. It was Victor Manson. He lied, Robert murmured. Mike said Manson was out of town, but he had been with them the entire time, and the girl had been in the van all along too. The realization hit him like a physical blow. If Manson had been lying about his whereabouts, what else was he hiding? And if the woman with him was really Emily, what horrors had she endured all these years? Robert's first instinct was to burst into the house, confront Manson, and demand answers. But reason prevailed. He was outnumbered, potentially outgunned, and had a little girl with him. The situation required caution. He reached for his phone to call Detective Marshall, only to realize he had no signal so far outside the city. He was alone, without backup, and without a plan. As he debated his next move, a sharp knock on the driver's side window made him jump. He turned to see Mike's face pressed against the glass, his expression murderous. Stay in the car, Robert instructed Carla, his voice low and urgent. Lock the doors. He rolled down the window just enough to speak. Mike, I was about to leave. And, spat Mike, you didn't follow us all the way here. What? Are you some kind of stalker? Robert's mind raced for an explanation that wouldn't escalate the situation. The girl wanted to see her sister one last time. He thought maybe if they could just talk reasonably with Mike. "You're trespassing on private property," Mike interrupted. "I don't know who you think you are, but you've crossed a line. Both of you need to come with me now." "I don't think that's a good idea," Robert replied, his hand hovering near the ignition. Mike's expression darkened. "That's not a request. Either you come willingly, or I radio the house and we handle this differently." He patted something under his jacket, the outline of what could only be a gun. Robert's blood ran cold, but he knew he had to stay calm for Carla's sake. "All right," he said, slowly opening the door. "We'll come talk. No need for things to get out of control." As Carla reluctantly climbed out on the passenger side, Mike escorted them toward the house. Robert's eyes moved quickly, taking in details that might help them later: the layout of the property, number of vehicles, possible escape routes. "You're making a mistake," Mike warned as they approached the porch. "The boss isn't going to like this intrusion." "All I want is to understand what's going on here," Robert answered, placing a protective hand on Carla's shoulder. Before they reached the steps, the front door opened, and Victor Manson himself appeared, his face a mask of cold fury. "Who are these people?" demanded of Mike. "The man was watching the house," Mike explained. "He's got the brat with him, Carla, the sister." Manson's eyes narrowed as he studied Robert. "And who exactly are you?" "My name is Robert Whitmore," he replied, straightening his shoulders. "I believe you have something or someone that belongs to me." Before Manson could respond, the woman Robert had seen earlier appeared in the doorway behind him. She froze when she saw Robert, her eyes widening in shock. At that moment, Robert heard the distinctive sound of sirens in the distance. Mike cursed under his breath as he pulled out a radio. "Boss, we've got company. It sounds like the police." Manson's face twisted with rage. "How did they find us?" "You brought them here," yelled at Robert. Robert shook his head. "My wife must have called them when I didn't come back. She knew I was following their van." The woman in the doorway continued to stare at Robert, a complex mix of emotions playing across her face: recognition, fear, hope, all flashing in eyes that were undeniably familiar. "Lena, come inside," Manson ordered sharply. But the woman, Lena, didn't move. Her gaze was locked with Robert's. "Emily," Robert whispered, his voice breaking. "Emily Grace." Something shifted in the woman's expression, a slight tremor running through her body at the sound of the name. The sirens grew louder, and Manson's demeanor shifted from rage to cold calculation. "Mike, get everyone inside. Bring them too." He nodded toward Robert and Carla. "We'll handle this my way." As they were led inside the house, Robert saw Yasmin sitting on a couch in the living room, her eyes wide with fear. Carla immediately tried to run to her, but Mike stopped her. The police sirens were now unmistakably close. Through the front window, Robert could see flashing lights approaching the property. "Victor," Mike said urgently. "What's the plan here?" Manson disappeared into another room, returning moments later with a gun. "Tell them we're loaded and ready," he instructed. Robert's heart raced. The situation was spiraling dangerously out of control. The woman, Emily, Lena, stood motionless by the fireplace, her face pale. Within minutes, police cars had surrounded the property. A voice came through a loudspeaker, identifying itself as the Fern Creek Police Department and demanding that everyone leave the house with their hands up. "No one moves," Manson growled, positioning himself by the window. "Mike, bring the girl here." Mike roughly grabbed Yasmin by the arm, dragging her toward Manson. Carla screamed and lunged forward, but Robert held her back, knowing any sudden movement could provoke violence. "Let her go," Robert said firmly. "She's just a child. This is between us adults." Manson let out a harsh, screeching laugh. "You have no idea what you're involved in, Whitmore. You should have called the police at the park and returned the girl or stayed out of it." Outside, Detective Marshall's voice came through the loudspeaker. "This is Detective Marshall of the Fern Creek Police Department. The house is surrounded. Come out peacefully and no one will be hurt." Manson turned toward the woman. "Lena, come here. Tell them everything is fine, that you're here voluntarily, and that the girl, Yasmin, is our newly adopted daughter." The woman hesitated, her eyes shifting between Manson and Robert. "Now, Lena," barked Manson. Slowly, she moved toward him but stopped halfway across the room. "I can't do this anymore, Victor," she said, her voice barely audible. What did you say, Whitmore? Manson's face darkened ominously. I said I can't do this anymore. Her voice was stronger now, more resolute. She turned toward Robert. You really are my father, aren't you? Robert nodded, tears forming in his eyes. Emily, we never stopped looking for you. Never. Lena, I warn you, Manson said, raising his gun. Come here now. But Emily, because Robert was now sure it was her, stood firm. No, Victor, it's over. In an instant, Manson aimed the gun at Robert. You did this. You turned her against me. Everything happened in a blur after that. Emily lunged at Manson as he aimed at Robert. There was a struggle, the deafening crack of a gunshot, and then another. Robert screamed in horror, certain he was about to witness either his or his daughter's death just moments after finding her. But when the chaos cleared, it was Manson who lay on the ground, blood spreading across his chest. Emily stood over him, a smaller gun trembling in her hands, while her own arm bled from a graze wound. Without hesitation, Robert intervened and kicked the weapons out of reach. Before Mike could react, police burst through the front door with guns drawn. Police. Everyone down, hands where we can see them. Robert dropped to his knees, pulling Carla down with him. Mike was quickly subdued and handcuffed. Medical personnel rushed in, first tending to Manson, who was still alive despite his grave wound, then to Emily. Moments later, another team arrived to attend to the two girls, securing and carefully evaluating them. As paramedics bandaged Emily's arm, Robert watched from just a few feet away, barely daring to believe that after 20 years he was in the same room as his daughter. The hospital hallway buzzed with activity as medical staff efficiently moved between rooms. Robert sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair outside the treatment room where doctors were attending to Emily's gunshot wound. He could hardly believe that after 20 years of searching, hope against hope, his daughter was alive and just behind that door. Detective Marshall approached, his expression serious but kind. Mr. Whitmore, the doctors say your daughter's injury is relatively minor. The bullet grazed her upper arm, requiring stitches but no surgery. Robert nodded, relief flooding over him. And Manson is in surgery, the detective continued. The bullet hit his chest but missed his heart. They're working to stabilize him now. What about the girls, Carla and Yasmin? They're with Child Protective Services in the pediatric wing. They're physically unharmed but understandably shaken. Robert rubbed his face, the day's events catching up with him. Helen had arrived at the hospital an hour earlier, frantic with worry after calling the police when Robert hadn't returned or answered his phone. The police were able to contact the rental company, track the car's GPS, and locate him on Manson's property. Now she was in the cafeteria, looking for coffee for both of them. The treatment room door opened, and a doctor emerged. Mr. Whitmore, you can see your daughter now. We've finished with the stitches, and she's resting comfortably. Robert's heart raced as he entered the room. Emily lay in the hospital bed, her arm bandaged, her face pale but calm. She looked up as he approached. Her green eyes, Helen's eyes, studied him with a mix of uncertainty and hope. Emily, he whispered, stopping at the foot of her bed, afraid to come too close too fast and scare her. Dad, she replied, her voice breaking on the word. That one word, Dad, broke something inside Robert. Tears he'd held back for hours spilled down his cheeks as he moved to her side, gently taking her uninjured hand in his. I never stopped looking for you, he said. Not for a single day. Emily's own eyes filled with tears. I thought you were dead. Victor told me. He said no one was looking for me anymore, that you and Mom died in a car accident. The door opened again and Helen entered, stopping short at the sight of her daughter. Emily swung the coffee cups forgotten in her hands. Mom. Emily's voice was small, childlike. Helen set down the cups with trembling hands and rushed to the bedside, carefully hugging her daughter's injured arm. The three of them clung to each other, 20 years of separation dissolving in a flood of tears and half-formed words. Eventually, Detective Marshall knocked gently and entered the room. Sorry to interrupt, he said, but I need to take your statement, Mrs. Whitmore. Or do you prefer to be called something else? Emily sat up straighter, wiping her eyes. My name is Emily Grace Whitmore, she said firmly. He called me Lena, but that was never my name. During the next hour, Emily recounted her ordeal, her voice steady despite the horror of her story. She described how Victor Manson, a truck driver at the time, had kidnapped her while she was skating to her friend's house. He told me there had been a robbery nearby, that it wasn't safe, she explained. When I refused to go with him, he grabbed me and put something over my face, a cloth with chemicals. I woke up in his truck hundreds of miles away. She described how Manson had kept her hidden, frequently moving between states, using back roads to avoid interstate checkpoints. Sometimes I hid in a false compartment in his truck. He never stayed in one place for long, except in Fern Creek. We came back here about once a month when he checked on his business. The pawn shop? Asked Detective Marshall, taking notes. Emily nodded. Timber Treasures was somehow his base of operations. He has other identities, other businesses in different towns. He deals in stolen goods, among other things. Why didn't you try to escape? Asked Helen softly, especially as she was growing up. Emily's eyes dropped. I did it first, but every time he caught me the punishments got worse, and he told me no one was looking for me anymore, that you two were dead. Eventually, I just stopped trying. It was easier to survive by playing along. When did he start calling you his wife? Asked Detective Marshall. When I turned 18, Emily replied, her voice hollow. That's when he started taking me to meet his men and acquaintances, introducing me as Lena, his quiet, shy wife, but most of the time he still kept me isolated. Detective Marshall's expression darkened as he wrote in his notebook. Emily, do you know why Victor adopted Yasmin from the orphanage? Was it a legal adoption? Emily's face clouded, and she gripped the sheet with her good hand. I don't know all the details, she said, pausing as if struggling with the words. A few months ago, I overheard Victor talking to Mike. He said I was getting old and that he wanted. Her voice faltered. Robert placed his hand over hers, offering silent support. Emily took a deep breath and continued. He said he wanted a new girl, a young one. He told Mike he was looking for a second wife. He said he would still keep me, but wanted what he called a fresh bud. Disgust and pain crossed her face as she recounted the conversation. Helen covered her mouth, with tears streaming down her face. They looked for a while, Emily went on. Then they found Yasmin at the orphanage. I don't know how they arranged the adoption, but it couldn't have been legal. Victor always preferred to do things off the books. He's involved in all kinds of illegal businesses and deals. He's paranoid about his identity and keeps changing it depending on which town he's in. Detective Marshall's jaw tightened. We will be conducting a full investigation with the orphanage and reviewing the records at Timber Treasures. If any corruption or bribery was involved, we will find it. What's going to happen to Victor component placement? Robert asked, his voice hard with barely controlled anger. He will face charges for Emily's kidnapping, illegal imprisonment, endangering a minor. Regarding Yasmin, weapons charges, and attempted murder, the detective replied. That's just the beginning. As we investigate his other operations, there will likely be additional charges. Robert felt satisfied that the man who had stolen his daughter's life would not escape justice. A knock on the door interrupted them. A nurse entered, followed by a CPS worker escorting Carla and Yasmin. The girls wanted to see you, explained the CPS worker. They've been asking for you since they arrived. Carla rushed forward, stopping just before the bed. Are you okay? She asked Emily. Did the bad man hurt you badly? Emily smiled softly. I'll be fine. It's just a scratch. How are you and Jasmine? Jasmine, half hidden behind her sister, looked up with wide eyes. Will we go back to the orphanage? Swing asked in a small voice. Before the CPS worker could respond, Robert intervened. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about that. He turned to the worker. I know it's not possible for us to adopt them right now. We live out of state and there would be a lot of paperwork and home studies. But I would like to help arrange for them to be placed in a better facility, and I'd like to provide financial support for their care and education. Emily reached her good hand out to Carla. You saved me, you know. If I hadn't been brave enough to seek help, I might never have found my family. Carla smiled proudly. You saved my sister too. The CPS worker nodded. We will certainly discuss placement options for the girls, and financial support would be greatly appreciated. As night fell, the hospital room became a center of activity. Doctors came to check on Emily. Police officers arrived with updates on the investigation, and Helen made countless phone calls to family back home, sharing the miraculous news. Victor Manson had survived surgery but remained in critical condition. Mike and 3 other men associated with Manson's operation had been arrested and were providing information to authorities, revealing a network of illegal activities spanning several states. When the room finally quieted, Robert found himself sitting beside Emily's bed, watching her sleep. Her face, so familiar yet changed by the years, looked peaceful perhaps for the first time in decades. Helen sat on the other side, her hand resting lightly on Emily's uninjured arm. 20 years, she whispered. I never thought we'd see this day. Thank you for making me go on this vacation, Robert whispered, his voice barely audible, beyond the lump in his throat. After all the searching, all the dead ends and disappointments, Emily had been found thanks to a pair of skates in a junk store window and the courage of a little girl who never gave up on her sister. Life had taken so much from them, 20 years of birthdays and holidays, ordinary days, and special moments that could never be recovered. But sitting here watching his daughter breathe, Robert knew what mattered most was not what had been lost, but what had been found. The darkness that had shrouded their lives for 2 decades was finally lifting. There would be challenges ahead. Emily would need time and support to heal from her trauma, and they all would need to learn how to be a family again. The journey would not be easy, but for the first time in 20 years, they would walk that path together. Outside the hospital window, stars were beginning to appear in the night sky. Robert remembered how much Emily loved watching the stars as a child, how she would make wishes on the first star she saw each night. Tonight, for the first time in 20 years, she didn't need to make a wish. The miracle she had been praying for all those years was sleeping peacefully before him, finally home where she belonged. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you did, don't hesitate to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell to watch more fascinating stories. Have a great day.